Can you imagine a night where the cold isn't just a feeling on your skin, but something that is listening, waiting for you to slip? Out there, the wind moves slowly but steadily. Snow doesn't fall in bursts, but settles in thin, quiet layers, turning the world still as if it's holding its breath. There are no streetlights, no engines, only darkness stretching from the edge of the forest all the way to the horizon. You're standing in front of a small wooden cabin, old, rough, completely isolated. This is not a place of comfort. This is a fragile line between warmth and cold, between waking up tomorrow morning or never waking up at all. No one shouts, no one runs. There is only a very gentle, truth-clear and undeniable, if warmth isn't held tonight, winter wins. If you feel yourself slowing down, if your breathing has softened just a little, stay with this story. And if you enjoy slow journeys through history like this one, please like, share and subscribe so each night we can step together into an older world and rest there in peace. You step inside the cabin. The wooden door closes behind you with a low, dry sound, not to seal out noise, but to slow the wind. Outside, winter remains. Inside, at least the wind has eased. Dim light from a weak fire in the central hearth casts long shadows across the wooden walls. The space is small, low-ceilinged, making you feel as if you must bow, not just with your body, but with your attention and patience. There is no sense of absolute safety here, only a feeling of enough to continue. No one speaks much. Every movement is slow, because moving too quickly in the cold makes breathing shallow, and shallow breathing means lost heat. Winter on the frontier doesn't attack with noise. It wears you down with time, minute by minute, hour by hour. And the most frightening thing about the night isn't the cold itself, but not realizing how cold you're becoming. No one needs to tell you this night is dangerous. Your body knows before your thoughts do. Hands held too long against cold metal go numb first. Toes lose sensation before you notice. Breathing grows shallower, not from fear, but from the instinct to conserve energy. No one says we could die. The words aren't necessary. They hang in the air as lightly as the thin smoke drifting from the hearth. The silence in the cabin isn't peaceful. It's an unspoken agreement between people and winter. We won't make noise. Please give us one more night. On the frontier, survival isn't about fighting. It's about keeping everything slow enough that the cold doesn't have an excuse to take too much. This cabin may only be a few meters wide. Low roof, roughly fitted wooden walls, gaps not fully sealed. Yet in this tight space, one thing is unmistakable: people are together here. Warmth doesn't come from a single source. It comes from many small things: a carefully tended fire, a blanket pulled a little closer, someone sitting just a bit nearer to someone else. No one expects comfort. The only hope is simple, that the night passes. The winter night doesn't need to be conquered. It only needs to be endured. You begin to understand that for frontier families, every night like this has one quiet goal. When morning comes, everyone is still there. No one speaks of distant tomorrows. No one thinks of spring. This night is long enough to claim all attention. And as you sit quietly in the cabin, listening to wind brush the walls and the fire crackle softly, you realize something important. Life on the frontier is not loud, but it is resilient. And in that moment, when winter presses in from outside and only thin wood stands between, you begin to see that this cabin is more than shelter. It is the final boundary between people and the cold, where every tiny gap carries the weight of survival. When you fully step inside the cabin, the first thing you notice isn't warmth. What you feel first is separation. A very thin, very fragile boundary, yet just enough to make the wind stop at the threshold. The cabin doesn't drive the cold away, it only slows it down, and on brutal winter nights slowing it down is already a gift. The cabin was built in haste, without blueprints, without standards, guided only by survival experience. Trees cut down nearby, bark still on, were stacked one on top of another. They aren't straight, they aren't even. Each log has its own shape, slightly curved, rough to the touch, heavy with the scent of dried sap. When placed together, they never seal perfectly. Between them, small gaps always remain wide enough for daylight to slip through, and wide enough for night wind to find its way in. These gaps aren't construction mistakes, they're unavoidable. On the frontier, there's no time and no materials for perfect walls. What people have is dirt, moss, whatever they can gather, and that's how chinking comes to be. A solution that isn't beautiful, isn't clean, but works. Mud is mixed, thick and heavy, cold in the hands. Moss is stuffed into the larger cracks. Where more strength is needed, dried cow dung is mixed with earth and pressed firmly into the gaps. The smell isn't pleasant, but smell doesn't kill people. Cold wind does. In this cabin, aesthetics are never the priority. If the wind can't get in, that's enough. When night falls, you can hear the wind trying. It slips through the smallest remaining gaps, creating faint whistling sounds, almost like whispers. The cabin is never completely silent. It makes the sounds of resistance, wood tightening in the cold mud, slowly drying, moss holding moisture. Every sound reminds you that this isn't a solid structure. This is a place doing its best to remain standing. The cabin isn't a house in the modern sense. It wasn't meant to feel comfortable. It doesn't promise long-term ease. It does only one thing. It places a thin layer of material between human beings and death by cold. And in that context, it fulfills its role quietly. The space inside is very small. Once the door is closed, you immediately feel that every square foot matters. There's no room for waste. Everything exists for a reason. No corner is meaningless. The single room is where people eat, work during the day, and take shelter at night. That tightness is exactly what keeps heat from escaping too quickly. Firelight, even weak, reveals the rough walls. Wooden shadows overlap, forming uneven patches of darkness. You don't see refinement, but you see effort. Every smear of packed mud is a moment of humans speaking to nature. Stop here, at least for tonight. Inside the cabin, the idea of outside and inside becomes sharply defined. Outside is endless darkness, shapeless wind, cold that doesn't negotiate. Inside is a confined space where everything touches, walls touch wind, people touch people, breath touches air. The cabin doesn't separate humans from nature. It only shrinks nature down to a size humans can endure. You begin to understand why the cabin is never considered absolute safety. It's only a boundary. One step outside and everything changes instantly. One forgotten gap, one piece of chinking that falls away one night with stronger than usual wind, any of it can break this fragile balance. That's why people in the cabin don't sleep carelessly. They sleep with a gentle alertness, knowing this place protects them, but only as much as it's able to. For frontier families, the cabin is the result of labor, but not a symbol of stability. It's a temporary answer to a very specific question. How do we survive this winter? No one thinks further than that. No one asks for more. As long as the cabin stands, as long as the wind is partially blocked, that night is considered a successful one. As you sit quietly inside that cabin, you realize something strange. Peace doesn't come from perfection. It comes from everyone understanding its limits. No one expects the cabin to provide complete warmth. They only hope it can hold on to the most precious heat of all the heat of life. And once the rough wooden walls have done their job of stopping the wind, the next question rises, naturally, slowly, almost silently. If the cold is no longer attacking from outside, then where will it come from? The answer is right beneath your feet, where the frozen ground quietly draws heat away all, through the long night ahead. Once the cabin door is shut, and the wind outside becomes only a distant sound held back by wood, the cold doesn't disappear. It simply changes its approach. No longer attacking through cracks in the walls, it begins to rise from below, very slowly, very patiently, from the packed earth floor beneath your feet. The cabin floor isn't a floor in the way you're used to. There are no flat wooden boards, no insulation. Just earth packed down by human feet, by time, by the repeated rhythms of daily life. By day the ground is hard and silent, but when night comes, it becomes a living mass of cold, quietly drawing heat from anything resting on it. You might not notice it right away. Cold from the ground isn't sharp or biting. It doesn't shock you. It seeps in, little by little, as if the earth is patiently waiting for your body to relax, for blood to slow, for warmth to fade before gently pulling it downward. Your feet feel it first. When bare skin touches the floor, even for a brief moment, you immediately understand why skin is rarely allowed to meet the ground. The cold doesn't rush upward as a jolt. It spreads slowly like water soaking into cloth. From the feet to the ankles, then the calves, and if it's allowed to go on too long, the body responds in a deeply primitive way. It curls inward. That's why the earth floor is never left bare. Before night falls, people cover it with whatever they have. Dry straw is spread in thin layers. Brittle autumn leaves collected earlier, their green scent long gone, are laid on top. Scraps of cloth, worn-out clothing, no longer usable, frayed sacks, everything is put to use. Nothing is ever not good enough when its sole purpose is to keep the body from touching the earth directly. You can feel the difference immediately when you stand on that layer of straw. It isn't warm, but it is slow. It slows the upward movement of cold. And over a long night, that delay is enough for the body to adapt enough to keep warmth from being drained too quickly. When you lie down, the first sensation isn't comfort. Straw is stiff. Dry leaves crackle softly. Cloth layers are uneven, thicker in some places, thinner in others. But very quickly the body stops judging. It simply listens. Weight settles. Warmth begins to gather at points of contact, and somewhere in that quiet acceptance you realize this is enough. The cold from the floor doesn't vanish, but it becomes familiar. It turns into a low, steady background, unchanging. The body learns how to work with it, pulling the legs in closer, curling slightly tighter, placing the feet together to conserve heat. Every movement is small, slow, as if any unnecessary motion might wake the cold again. In the night you may wake because of something very faint, a numbness in the soles of your feet or your back touching a thinner patch of straw. You don't sit up, you adjust gently, pulling another piece of cloth closer, shifting your body just a little. The body does this almost without thought. This isn't a taught skill, it's survival memory. The earth floor teaches a quiet lesson. Warmth is not something to waste. Every unit of heat matters. Every small distance between skin and ground counts. That's why no one lies flat. No one stretches out fully. Sleeping positions in the cabin are almost always curled inward, folded, as if the body is holding itself. If you listen carefully, you'll notice that at night, the most common sounds don't come from wind or fire, but from tiny movements of the body. A soft rustle of straw, cloth brushing lightly, a breath-changing rhythm when someone finds a warmer position. These sounds aren't disruptive. They're signals that people are still adjusting, still just awake enough to keep each other warm. The quiet, cold rising from the floor does something else too. It slows time. When you lie on cold earth, your thoughts don't wander far. You don't drift into fantasy. The mind narrows, focusing only on what's happening inside the body. Feet, knees, hips, shoulders. Each part sends a small signal, and you answer with a gentle adjustment. In that silent exchange, sleep doesn't arrive as a sudden drop. It comes as a gradual release. You don't fall asleep, you settle down. And even before deep sleep arrives, the body has already begun conserving energy, holding on to warmth, waiting for morning. The earth floor is never seen as an enemy. It's simply a reality to be accounted for. Frontier people don't try to conquer the cold beneath them. They only try not to face it directly, and through layers of straw, leaves and scraps of cloth, they create a very crude barrier, but one that's enough to let the night pass. When your body has grown used to that cold foundation, when your feet are no longer the greatest source of heat loss, your attention shifts to the next thing, where you rest your back. Not the floor anymore, but what's been made to lift you off the ground. A place that isn't quite a bed, but the next step in staying warm through the long night ahead. Once your body has adjusted to the cold beneath your feet, once the ground no longer demands your constant attention, your focus naturally shifts a little higher to where you rest your back through the night. In a frontier cabin, this isn't quite a bed. It doesn't exist as a distinct piece of furniture. It's more like a prepared area meant to keep you off the ground, and that alone is enough. The bed here is usually nothing more than a rough wooden frame set, low, sometimes barely higher than the earth itself. In some cabins, it's simply a few planks laid across stacked logs. There are no springs, no cushioning. Everything is still, firm, real. And that honesty allows the body to quickly understand its limits. On top of the frame are straw-filled sacks stuffed in haste. The straw isn't selected carefully. It's dried grass cut in summer, unevenly cured. Corn husks crackle softly when you shift your weight. All of it is packed into coarse cloth bags, hand-stitched, unmeasured. Each mattress is a random collection of what remained after autumn, uneven, imperfect, but united by a single purpose: to create distance between the body and the cold. When you lie down, the first sensation isn't softness. It's less cold. That's the only standard that matters. Your body isn't cradled. It's placed where it needs to be. Straw pokes lightly through the fabric. Some stalks are stiffer, brushing against your back. But very quickly the body stops reacting, not because it grows used to it, but because it understands that resistance won't change anything. During the night you may hear faint sounds of small creatures, mice, searching for warmth. They don't cause panic. They simply exist like the people in this cabin, each trying to make it through winter. You know they're there, but you don't sit up. Sudden movement would only invite the cold in faster, so you stay still, sharing space, sharing warmth, sharing silence. The smell of a straw mattress is hard to name. It's a mixture of dried grass, old cloth, damp earth, and human presence. It isn't pleasant, but it's steady. It doesn't change through the night, and that steadiness becomes a sign of safety. When the smell stays the same, it means the fire is still burning somewhere. The wind hasn't pushed too far inside. The cabin is still holding its state. If you compare this bed to a modern one thick level, soft the distance is vast. But inside the cabin no one compares. Comparison is an act of excess. Here people ask only one simple question: is my back touching the ground? If the answer is no, the bed has done its job. Sleep on a straw mattress is never deep. You wake often. Each turn is a small, careful adjustment. Your body searches for softer spots, thicker layers of straw. Over the hours you learn the map of the mattress, where it holds warmth better, where it lets air pass more freely. It's a quiet process, done without thought. For frontier people, the bed isn't a place to relax. It's a nighttime survival tool. By day, the mattress may be propped up and aired out. By night, it's laid down as part of a heat retention strategy. There's no sentimental attachment to it, but no disregard either. It's respected because it fulfills its purpose. Some nights humidity rises. The straw absorbs moisture, growing heavier, colder. You feel it clearly in your back, your shoulders. But instead of complaining, the body adjusts, curling inward, pulling blankets closer, shifting position. Everything happens in a half-awake, half-asleep state. There's no clear line between waking and sleeping, only a chain of small adjustments meant to keep heat as even as possible. The straw bed teaches a simple truth: comfort is not the goal. Enough is the goal. Enough to slow heat loss. Enough to wake up still able to move. Enough to face another day of work. And as you lie there, surrounded by the scent of dried grass and the steady rhythm of breathing around you, you feel a quiet kind of reassurance, relief, that you're no longer lying directly on the cold earth. The night moves on. Your body begins to settle into the rhythm of that crude bed. Moments of waking grow farther apart. Breathing slows. And once the distance between you and the ground is secure, once your back and sides are no longer the greatest sources of heat loss, your attention naturally turns to the next thing, what will cover your entire body, layer by layer, holding onto every precious trace of human warmth through the long winter night ahead. Once your back is lifted off the ground, once the rough straw mattress has done its quiet work, the next step comes naturally, a gentle layer laid over the body, not to make you forget the cold, but to help you stay with warmth a little longer. In a frontier cabin, that layer is a blanket, and deeper still, a quilt. A quilt isn't something bought ready-made. It isn't even. It isn't perfect. Each quilt is a map of time pieced together from clothing that once protected people in other seasons' work. Shirts worn thin at the shoulders, faded dresses, scraps that used to be sleeves and are no longer usable. Every piece of fabric has already lived a life before becoming part of this quilt. When the quilt is laid over you, you don't feel warmth right away. You feel weight just enough for the body to know it's covered. Then layer by layer warmth begins to stay. Not fast, not suddenly. Each added layer is a small promise this night can be made it through. In the cabin, no one counts quilt layers by number. They count by feeling. When the quilt is pulled just past the chin, when the shoulders stop, their faint trembling, when the breath settles into a steady rhythm, that's when it's enough. The quilt doesn't erase the cold. It simply stands between you and it, the way the cabin stands between you and the wind. One layer, then another, and in that simple stacking hope appears quietly. A quilt is like armor, not hard, not shining, but soft, heavy, and soaked with memory. It doesn't stop the cold through strength, but through accumulation. Old fabric, uneven stitches, imperfect patches, all working together. No single piece could keep you warm alone. Together they form a safe zone. You can smell the quilt, The scent is familiar old cloth smoke from winters past the presence of people. It isn't sharp, it's deep, steady, and that familiarity helps the body relax faster. When the smell doesn't change, nothing unusual is happening. The night is moving at its proper pace. In many frontier families, a quilt isn't just for warmth, it's something passed down. Some fabric once belonged to someone who is no longer there. Some stitches were sewn during quiet afternoons before the wind arrived. When you pull that quilt over yourself, you're not just holding heat, you're wrapped in family history, even if no one ever says it aloud. Children often sleep better under a familiar quilt, not because it's warmer, but because it's known. The body recognizes the weight, the smell, the feeling, and in that recognition worry settles. Adults feel it too, though they rarely admit it. When they pull the quilt up over their shoulders, they know someone once stitched each seam thinking of a night just like this. The quilt isn't perfect. Some places are thinner, others thicker. When you shift, you can feel the difference clearly. But that unevenness is what makes the quilt alive. It asks for gentle adjustments, pulling here, folding there. Movements so small and slow they keep warmth without fully waking you. Deep into the night, when the cabin grows still, when only distant wind and the steady breathing of the fire remain, the quilt becomes the closest thing to your body. It touches your skin before the air does. It holds the warmth of each breath you release. It creates a very small private space, not to separate you from others, but to rest quietly within yourself. No one cares if the quilt is beautiful. No one worries about colour or pattern. Its value lies in the fact that it's there at the right moment with the right weight, the right thickness. On the coldest nights, that value doesn't need words. It's felt in silence. You can imagine the family lying close together, sharing edges of the quilt, pulling an extra corner when needed. There's no clear line between my blanket and yours. Warmth moves. Fabric shifts. Everything adapts to the human body, not the other way around, and that's what makes the night gentler. Once the quilt has settled, once the body is wrapped in old familiar layers, the heartbeat slows, breathing deepens, scattered thoughts fade. The night is no longer something to defeat. It becomes time endured together. And when that fabric shield has done its work, when warmth is held long enough for the body to rest, you begin to understand something essential. The most precious heat doesn't come from blankets alone. It comes from other bodies nearby, other breaths sharing the same space, because in a frontier winter, sleeping together isn't a choice. It's the most natural form of survival. Once the quilt has fully covered the body, once the old layers of fabric have managed to hold on to the most fragile traces of warmth, one truth becomes very clear. In a frontier winter night, blankets are never enough when you're alone. Here, the most effective source of warmth isn't material, it's people. Inside the small cabin, everyone lies close together. There's no space reserved for privacy. No clear boundary between one body and another. Shoulder touches shoulder, back touches back. One person's feet may rest against another's calf. It all happens naturally, without discussion, without careful arrangement. Bodies move instinctively toward heat. Sleeping together here doesn't carry the meaning of intimacy or personal choice. It's a survival reflex. When night falls and temperatures drop, human body heat becomes a precious resource unseen, impossible to store but able to be shared. And on the coldest nights, that sharing determines whether someone wakes up the next morning. Children are usually placed in the middle, not as an emotional preference, but because it's the warmest position. Heat from adults surrounds them, creating a more stable thermal zone. You can feel small, steady breaths beside you. A tiny arm resting on an adult's hand. A head leaning into someone's chest. No one names these gestures. They simply happen as if repeated across generations. Parents usually lie along the outer edges, not to protect in a heroic sense, but simply to block the cold. Their bodies take more of the chill, but they also hold heat longer. Elders, if present, are placed where drafts are weakest, a little closer to the fire. There's no fixed layout, only slow, familiar adjustments based on nights already lived. No one sleeps comfortably. Legs stay bent. Arms don't fully stretch out. One side of the body is warmer than the other, but no one complains. Comfort isn't the goal. Surviving the night is. And to do that, the body learns to accept inconvenience as part of the natural order. When you lie close to others, you feel warmth clearly, not as higher temperature, but as stability. Heat doesn't escape as quickly as it does when you sleep alone. The air between bodies grows thicker, more still. The quilt above no longer covers just one person. It covers a cluster of bodies breathing in the same rhythm. There are moments in the night when you wake very lightly, not from cold, but from a small movement. Someone shifts. Someone breathes more deeply. Someone pulls the quilt closer. You don't open your eyes. You simply sense it. And almost immediately you realize everything is still all right. Someone is there. Warmth is there. That's enough. Sleeping together also brings a quiet feeling of belonging. In the darkness, when faces blur, when all visible markers fade, what remains is the most basic presence of being human heartbeats, breathing warmth. No conversation needed, no touch beyond what's necessary, just closeness. For those accustomed to personal space, this idea may feel uncomfortable, but in a frontier cabin, privacy is a luxury. What matters most is the survival of the group. Within that order, everyone understands their role, even if it's never spoken aloud. Human body heat combined creates a more resilient source of warmth than any inanimate object. It shifts with breathing, with movement, with sleep. It isn't perfectly steady, but it's adaptive. When someone grows colder, they move closer. When someone overheats, they pull back slightly. It all happens half awake, half asleep, without instruction. Over long nights, the presence of others also brings a sense of safety that's hard to name. If something unusual happens, the fire dies down, the wind strengthens, someone will notice. No one is alone in watching the night, and that shared vigilance allows the body to relax, even if only a little. Sleeping together doesn't make the night comfortable, it only makes it bearable. And in the frontier world, that ability to endure is a quiet kind of success. There's no celebration, no victory, just a night passing without losing anyone. Once bodies have found their places, once warmth is more evenly shared, sleep begins to deepen, not deep in the sense of fullness, but deep in the sense of stability. And within that stability, another concern slowly takes shape: how the body is positioned to keep blood flowing, to keep the cold from settling into the most vulnerable parts through the long night ahead. Once bodies have settled close, together, once warmth has been shared more evenly, sleep in a frontier cabin still cannot fully let go. The night is long, the cold is patient, and the body by instinct begins to do what it knows best: self-adjust. No one lies still all night. Not because of discomfort, but because staying still too long is dangerous. Blood needs to circulate. Joints need to move. The parts of the body most vulnerable to cold feet, knees, hands must be gently reawakened at intervals. And so in the darkness a series of very small movements begins. One of the most common arrangements is sleeping head to toe, one person's head near another's feet. not to save space but to distribute heat. When many cold feet gather on one end and many warm heads on the other, the group's temperature balances more evenly. No one explains this aloud. It's learned through cold nights passed on through habit. You might feel someone's feet lightly touching your calf. Not a clear contact, just a faint presence. When that happens, you don't pull away. You simply move your leg a little closer. Two cold sources meet, and in a strange way they become less cold. Through the night, bodies turn without conscious intent. A shoulder shifts left, a knee folds in, an arm is drawn closer to the chest. These movements don't fully wake anyone. They occur in the half-awake space where the body acts before thought can interfere. There are moments when you wake because of something barely noticeable, fingertips growing numb or feet colder than before. You don't open your eyes, you don't sit up, you simply change position, curl inward, stretch lightly, then curl again. Blood begins to flow a bit faster. The numbness fades, and you settle back down. These are sleep techniques never written in books. No manual teaches when to turn to avoid frostbite. No guide explains where to place your feet to hold warmth longer. Yet in a frontier cabin, these techniques exist clearly in body memory and habits repeated winter after winter. Older people turn more slowly. Their bodies aren't as flexible as children's, so they're often placed where fewer adjustments are needed, where warmth stays more stable. Children, by contrast, move more. They curl, stretch, roll, then curl again, not from restlessness, but because their bodies are learning how to retain heat in their own way. Some nights you can sense the rhythm of turning through the cabin, not all at once, not chaotic, but like small waves passing from one person to another. One movement shifts the quilt slightly. The person beside them feels it and adjusts in response. Everything happens so slowly it almost doesn't exist. These movements don't interrupt sleep. They are part of sleep. In this context, sleep isn't stillness. Sleep is a continuous series of subtle adaptations, allowing the body to rest without being overtaken by cold. Blood circulation is vital. When a part of the body stays cold too long, it grows sluggish, numb. Frontier winter night, numbness isn't just discomfort, it can be the beginning of frostbite. That's why these small movements, even when they break sleep, keep the body intact until morning. You can imagine a hand slipping out from under the quilt, brushing lightly against the fabric, then returning inside, not from sudden cold, but from the need to feel again. Skin touching air, then cloth reminds the body it can still respond, that it's still in the fight. In the cabin, no one expects unbroken sleep. That expectation doesn't exist. Instead, there's a modest goal to wake up and still be able to move. And to reach that goal, the body must be allowed to move, even if only a little. These techniques are never named. They aren't taught as knowledge. They're passed on through observation, through sleeping beside others, through feeling the rhythm of another body's movement in the night. Children raised in such cabins carry this body memory for life, even when they no longer need it. As the night deepens, movements grow less frequent. The body finds a temporary balance, not perfect, but enough. And within that fragile balance, another element quietly remains central, the fire still burning slowly, fading and needing to be watched through the long night ahead. Once bodies have found their places, once small movements begin to fade, there is still one thing that is never allowed to sleep in a fife. Frontier cabin, the fire. It doesn't lie still like people do. It doesn't relax. It breathes, and its breathing sets the rhythm for the entire cabin through the night. The hearth usually sits at the center, not for beauty but for necessity. Heat needs to spread evenly, light needs to be enough to see, and if something goes wrong, everyone must sense it immediately. The fire isn't hidden. It's placed where all can see it as a quiet reminder that life depends on it. Fire brings warmth, but it doesn't give generously. It needs to be fed, it needs to be understood, and above all, it needs to be watched. A fire that burns too hot will consume wood faster than expected. A fire that burns too low will die before the night ends. Keeping a fire alive just enough is a skill learned, not through instruction but through many long nights. On winter nights, people don't let the fire blaze high. They bank the fire, spreading the embers out, covering them with a thin layer of ash, allowing it to burn slowly, evenly, holding heat longer. Ash isn't a sign of ending. In the cabin, ash is another blanket for the fire. It keeps embers from dying the way a quilt keeps bodies from the cold. You can smell the gentle warmth of ash in the air, not sharp, not smoky, just a deep, familiar scent. When that scent stays steady, the fire is safe. When it changes sharper, heavier, someone's body wakes instantly, even without intention. Fire is both companion and danger. One stray spark can catch straw cloth, dry wood. A small cabin allows no mistakes. That's why no one sleeps completely deeply while the fire still burns. There's always a thin layer of awareness left behind, enough to hear the fire change its rhythm, enough to feel heat rise or fall. At night, firelight doesn't illuminate the cabin the way daylight does. It creates only small shifting pools of light. Shadows of people, walls and beams overlap slowly. Nothing moves sharply. Everything seems to breathe together. That light isn't meant to show detail. It's meant to reassure, to remind that darkness hasn't taken everything. Adults are usually the ones who understand fire best, not because they're stronger, but because they've lived through more nights. They know when to add wood, when to spread ash, when to leave the fire alone. Children watch the fire and learn to respect it, not to touch, not to play, not to treat it as entertainment. Fire in the cabin is never something to admire casually. It's a living presence that must be handled properly. There are moments in the night when you hear a soft crack from the embers, not a pop, just a dry sound signaling wood changing state. It doesn't startle anyone. It's familiar, like a marker of time, reminding you the night is still moving and the fire is still doing its work. But fire also carries a quiet tension. If it goes out, the cabin cools very quickly. Heat doesn't fade gradually, it drops. And when that happens, every other layer of protection must work harder. That's why, even when tired, even when sleepy, someone must keep part of their awareness on the fire. The air inside the cabin holds a very specific feeling because of this calm but not relaxed. People sleep, but they don't abandon watchfulness. They rest, but they don't step away from responsibility. Fire becomes the center of balance between sleep and wakefulness, between safety and danger. You can picture an adult waking halfway through the night very lightly, not sitting up, not speaking, just shifting closer to the hearth, using a stick to adjust embers, adding a thin layer of ash, then returning to their place. Everything happens in silence. No one wakes fully, but the whole cabin stays warm a little longer. Fire also connects people to time. In its glow, memories rise, not clearly, not as images, but as a sense that nights like this have happened before long ago, that others in other cabins once sat beside fires just like this, keeping them alive long enough for a family to last the night. In a frontier cabin, fire carries no grand symbolism. It doesn't stand for victory or power. It stands for one modest thing: waking up in the morning. And because of that modesty, it's respected absolutely. As the night deepens, as ash grows thicker, the fire lowers its voice. Light dims. Heat remains but no longer presses. The cabin enters a fragile balance where everything is just enough. No one wants the fire brighter. No one wants it gone. This state between extremes is the safest one. And within that balance, another reality becomes clear. Fire cannot care for itself. No matter how carefully it's banked, it still needs people to return, to look, to adjust. The night doesn't pass in one continuous sleep. It's broken into pieces by awakenings, by checks, by half-conscious moments, where sleep becomes a series of short stretches woven together with the quiet responsibility of guarding the warmth of the entire cabin. Once the fire has been carefully banked, once the embers breathe evenly beneath a thin layer of ash, the cabin does not enter full sleep. It enters another state, half rest, half watch. No one is fully awake, but no one is fully asleep either. On frontier winter nights, sleep is never a continuous flow. It's broken into short stretches, interrupted by very light awakenings. And in those moments, the fire is always the first thing felt. Parents usually take turns. There's no formal watch schedule, just a natural rhythm formed over many nights. When one person becomes too tired to hold on to that thin layer of awareness, the other opens their eyes sooner. No need to wake anyone. No signals. Their bodies simply understand. Sometimes you open your eyes because you feel the air has changed. The warmth has dropped slightly. The scent of ash has thinned. These signals are subtle, easy to miss if you're not used to them. But for those who've lived through many winters, they're enough to pull them up from that shallow sleep. You sit up slowly, not disturbing the floor, not dragging the quilt, just shifting toward the hearth. The embers are still there, but not strong enough. You nudge them gently with a stick, hear the soft collapse of coals, add a little ash, or place in a small piece of wood. Every movement is economical, saving energy, saving firewood, saving even wakefulness. Then you return to your place. There's no feeling of having completed a task, only the sense that balance has been held a little longer. Children in frontier families also grow accustomed to this rhythm, not to carry heavy responsibility, but to learn attentiveness. Some wake when they hear the fire change its sound. Some are taught to read the colour of embers. Too red means too hot. Too grey means close to dying. They don't tend the fire like adults. They simply watch, then drift back to sleep. Sleep, because of this, is never deep. It's like a calm surface of water with a slow current beneath. You sleep, but your ears remain open. You dream, but your body holds a faint tension. Not anxiety, but readiness. Some nights you can't remember how many times you woke. Time is no longer measured in hours. It's measured in how many times you pulled the quilt higher, how many times warmth returned, how many times you heard the faint crack of embers. Each time you sink a little deeper, but never to the bottom. Fatigue accumulates slowly. It doesn't strike all at once. It spreads evenly like mist. By morning the body feels heavier, eyelids harder to lift. But in the cabin, fatigue isn't seen as failure. It's proof you stayed long enough to grow tired. No one expects full rest on nights like these. That expectation doesn't exist. The only measure is morning. When the first light slips through the gaps in the wood, when you open your eyes and can still feel your hands and feet, that is success. Waking up is enough. No one says it aloud, but it's present in every action, in how the fire is banked, in how people lie close together, in how brief awakenings are accepted as part of the night, not interruptions. There are strange moments in this fragmented sleep when you're awake but not fully, when you hear another person's breathing blend with yours, when warmth returns then fades gently again. In those moments, time seems to stop moving forward. It simply repeats steadily until daylight arrives. This kind of sleep doesn't refresh, but it gives endurance. It keeps the body from breaking down. It keeps the mind from panic. And most importantly, it keeps the fire both in the hearth and in the people from going out completely. As the night nears its end, as awakenings grow less frequent as the fire burns just enough to keep the cabin from falling into deep cold, something else quietly begins to take shape, not loudly, not urgently, temporary ways of holding heat for moments when the fire cannot work alone. Once the night has broken sleep into fragments, once the fire can no longer work alone through the long stretch of darkness, people begin to think about temporary sources of heat, things that can bring warmth closer to the body for very short moments, but moments that matter. Nothing complicated, just stones, bricks, pots of hot water, ordinary objects by day but silent allies by night. They're placed near the hearth and left there long enough to absorb heat. No one rushes. Stone needs time to warm from the inside. Brick does too. Water in a pot must reach just the right point, not to drink but to hold warmth. When everything is ready, the objects are wrapped. One layer of old cloth, then another. No one places a hot stone directly into bedding. The caution here isn't fear. It's an understanding of the fragile line between warmth and danger. One careless moment could scorch straw, singe fabric, turn the night into chaos. And in a small cabin, chaos is unacceptable. When the warmed stone is placed inside the covers, you feel the difference immediately. Not a spreading wave of heat, but a concentrated pocket of warmth. It doesn't last long. It arrives, then fades clearly. But on deep winter nights, even a few minutes of warmth are enough for the body to shift gears enough to speed circulation, loosen stiff joints, allow sleep to return. A pot of hot water brings a different sensation. The warmth is softer, more stable for a short while. When placed near the belly or the feet, it helps the body regain balance more quickly. But water cools fast. And once it cools, it's no longer a heat source. It becomes a weight that must be moved away so it doesn't draw warmth back out. These heat-holding objects aren't used by everyone at once. They're shared in turn. Children feel the cold sooner. Older bodies take longer to warm again. No order is spoken. Experience decides. Whoever shivers more receives it first. Whoever is warmer waits a little longer. There's a particular quiet when a warm stone is passed from one person to another. Not ritual, just shared understanding. Everyone knows this is a temporary resource. No one keeps it too long. No one claims it. Warmth is shared just as body heat was shared before. But ingenuity comes with trade-offs. Stones can be too hot. Bricks may hold heat unevenly. Pots can spill if moved carelessly. That's why these objects are used only when needed, not every night, not for every sleep. They're answers for moments when the fire has softened its voice and the body hasn't yet adapted. You can feel a faint tension when a hot stone rests inside the bedding. Not stress attention. The body doesn't fully let go. A part of awareness stays alert, checking the cloth, sensing the position. That awareness doesn't erase sleep. It makes sleep shallower but safer. In a frontier cabin, there are no perfect solutions. Every way of holding warmth carries risk, and people don't try to remove risk, they balance it. They accept that gaining a little more warmth requires holding on to a little more awareness. It's a quiet agreement between humans and the cold night. These heat-holding objects teach a simple lesson. Warmth isn't something you can keep forever. It comes, then goes. It must be renewed. And in the short time it's present, the body needs to make use of it, dropping the shoulders, unclenching the jaw, letting heat sink deeper before it fades. When the stone cools, when the water no longer gives off warmth, the objects are moved away from the bedding. No regret, no effort to stretch them further. People return to steadier sources of heat, the fire-shared bodies, the quilt. The temporary solutions have done their work. In the night, you may not remember exactly when you used a warm stone. The memory fades quickly, but the body remembers. It remembers warmth returning to the feet. It remembers deeper breaths for a few minutes. And that body memory is enough to let you sink back into sleep, even if it's never deep. Stones, bricks, pots of hot water aren't the center of the night. They're small strokes added when needed, removed when no longer right. They don't replace the fire. They don't replace people. They simply fill brief gaps, moments where cold might slip in without that quiet ingenuity. As the night moves into its later half, as temporary measures are used and set aside, the cabin returns to its familiar rhythm. And now attention shifts away from scattered pockets of warmth toward drawing the space inward, keeping breath and heat closer together with layers of cloth hides and drawn bed curtains, forming a small pocket of calm inside the winter night. Once the temporary sources of heat have been used, once the stones have cooled and the pot of hot water is set aside, the cabin doesn't try to create more warmth. Instead, it does something else. It draws inward. Space begins to fold in on itself very slowly, very gently, like a long breath taken before sinking deeper into the night. Bed curtains aren't separate objects designed for decoration. They're simply old blankets, thick scraps of cloth, sometimes worn animal hides hung with rope, wooden pegs, or just draped over the bed frame. There's no fixed shape, no standard size. Each cabin hangs its curtains in its own way, depending on what's available. When those curtains are drawn closed, you feel the change immediately. Not a clear rise in temperature, but the air itself slows down. Breath no longer disperses through the whole cabin. It's held close to the body, hovering around the face, the chest, the shoulders. Within that small space, each exhale feels just a little warmer. The sensation is much like being inside a tent, not a large one, but just big enough to lie in. The world outside the cabin still exists. Wind still moves, snow still falls, darkness still stretches on. But behind the curtain, those things feel far away. Sound softens. Firelight no longer dances across the walls. It seeps through the fabric in dim, muted patches. Bed curtains don't just hold heat, they hold quiet. The soft crackle of fire grows deeper. The wind against the cabin sounds like it's coming from somewhere else. Movements from others inside the cabin are filtered down to familiar, gentle sounds, breathing fabric, brushing straw, shifting lightly. Within this enclosed space, the body begins to relax in a different way. There's no need to monitor the whole cabin anymore. No need to listen for every change. Much of the world has been covered over, and as the outer space grows smaller, the inner space inside the body, inside sensation becomes clearer. You can feel your own breathing more distinctly. Each inhale is no longer biting cold but cool and familiar. Each exhale doesn't vanish at once. It lingers, briefly touches the skin of your face, then slowly blends into the thickened air around you. This is a very subtle warmth, not from fire, not from objects, but from enclosure at the right moment. If animal hides are used, they're usually hung on the outermost layer of the curtain, heavier, thicker, better at stopping drafts. Fabric and blankets on the inside are softer, easier to move. When you touch them, nothing feels unfamiliar. They carry the scent of the cabin smoke, people time. Nothing sharp, nothing new. And that familiarity calms the mind. In this space, sleep changes shape. It's no longer something you strive for. It becomes a state you're allowed to enter. You don't have to try to sleep. You only have to stay still. The curtains have done their work. The cabin has done its part. Now the body only needs to do the last thing, let go. There are moments of deep quiet inside bed curtains, when you can no longer clearly tell whether you're lying in a cabin or in a small tent in the woods, when the world shrinks to fit the body. When time is no longer measured in hours, but in the steadying rhythm of breath. Bed curtains also bring a unique sense of privacy. Not privacy that separates you from others, but privacy that allows you to be with yourself. You still know family and community are just beyond the fabric. But in this moment, you're permitted to settle without responding to anything. For elders, this enclosed space is especially important. It spares the body from constant adjustment. It reduces unnecessary stimulation. For children, bed curtains feel like a nest, familiar, protective, comforting. They sleep more deeply, move less when the world is made smaller this way. No one thinks of bed curtains as an invention. They're simply a natural response to cold. When more heat can't be created, people learn to hold on to what they already have. And holding space matters as much as holding warmth. Once the curtains are fully drawn, the cabin itself seems to recede. The fire still burns, but it's no longer the center of attention. It becomes background farther away, smaller. The responsibility of tending it remains, but the tension softens. The night has entered its quietest phase. You lie there in a space just big enough, surrounded by fabric, familiar scents, your own breath. No need to think, no need for many adjustments. Everything has been arranged for you to rest. And when the space has closed in enough, small enough, quiet enough, another thing becomes clear: what touches your skin directly. No longer air or distance, but the clothes you're wearing to sleep layer by layer, becoming the final barrier between your body and the long, cold night ahead. Once the bed curtains are fully drawn, once the space around you has been reduced to just enough for breath, there is one final layer of protection touching your body directly, clothing. Not sleepwear in the soft, comforting sense, but full layers worn exactly as they are, not removed, not changed, because in a frontier winter night, bare skin is a risk. People sleep in the same clothes they wore all day: thick wool shirts, coarse trousers, sometimes an extra worn underlayer. There is no ritual of changing before sleep, no moment of preparing in a relaxing way. Keeping clothes on is not carelessness, it is heat conservation. Every time clothing is removed, every time skin meets cold air, the body loses what it struggled all day to hold. Wool is the most trusted material. Not soft, not smooth, but able to retain heat even when damp. Wool hugs the body, creating small pockets of trapped air that hold warmth. When you breathe, when you shift slightly, those air pockets remain mostly undisturbed, quietly doing their work. Socks are never taken off. Feet lose heat fastest, and a thick pair of socks, even worn thin at the heel, even badly patched, is more valuable than almost anything else. When the feet stay warm, the rest of the body stabilizes more easily. Frontier people understand this through feeling, not explanation. Hats matter just as much. A wool cap pulled down over the ears, sometimes low across the forehead. No one finds it uncomfortable. No one thinks of inconvenience. At night, a hat is not an accessory. It is a lid over the part of the body that loses heat most easily. When the head stays warm, sleep comes sooner, not deep but steady. Sleeping clothes here are not pleasant. They are stiff, heavy. They carry the scent of the long day smoke, dried sweat, old fabric. But the smell is familiar, and that familiarity keeps the mind from becoming alert. The body recognizes that nothing has changed, that nothing unusual is happening. There is no space left for bare skin. Wrists, ankles, collarbones, everything is covered. Even the smallest gap can become an entry point for cold. In the cabin, modesty has nothing to do with morality. It is purely practical. Covering the body is about surviving the night, nothing more. Some nights the clothes are damper than usual. Melted snow, rising moisture inside the cabin. Wool grows heavier, colder, but it is still better than bare skin. That discomfort is accepted as part of the exchange comfort traded for safety. When you lie down in those layers, the body does not relax immediately. It needs time to redistribute heat, but slowly warmth gathers. Wool holds heat at the chest. Trousers retain it at the thighs. Socks protect the feet. The hat shelters the head. Each part works separately yet toward the same goal, slowing the loss of heat. Clothing becomes armor not for fighting but for enduring. It does not make you stronger. It simply keeps you from weakening too quickly through the night. And in the frontier world, that is enough. Sleeping fully dressed also brings another advantage: readiness. If something happens, the fire dies, the wind rises, the roof shifts, no one needs time to dress. The body can stand immediately, even half asleep. That readiness is not born from anxiety but from habit repeated across many nights. Children raised in these cabins don't find sleeping in clothes strange. For them it is simply what night looks like. Elders feel the same. Their bodies need stability, less change, less exposure. Clothing provides that steadiness. When all layers are finally in place, the bed curtains drawn, the quilt settled, clothing close to skin, the night becomes easier in a very specific way. Not easier because it is fully warm, but because fewer adjustments are needed. The body knows everything necessary is there. It can stop checking. You lie there fully clothed in a small, quiet, dark space. Nothing left to do, nothing left to fix. And in that moment, a very gentle feeling appears: this is enough. Yet even when the body is wrapped this carefully, a frontier winter night still holds one more source of warmth, warm living, and always pressing into shared space. It comes from beings who do not speak human language, but who have accompanied people through countless long winters. Once clothing fits close to the skin, once the human body itself becomes a layer of insulation, a frontier winter night still holds another source of warmth, living, breathing. Wordless. That source is animals. They are never named as a solution. They are simply there, and their warmth naturally finds its way into human space. In small cabins, dogs usually lie closest, not because they are favored, but because they seek out people. They curl beside feet and hips, stretch along the edge of a straw bed. Their breathing is steady and deep, releasing a warmth that feels constant and reliable. When you shift slightly, they adjust without opening their eyes, as if they understand that staying close matters. Cats behave differently. They search for the warmest points near the hearth, near wrists, near the chest. They don't stay in one place all night. They move quietly, like small currents of heat, settling only when enough warmth is found. Their fur carries the scent of smoke, and people so familiar that simply feeling it allows your body to soften. In cabins with livestock, that presence becomes even stronger. Cows, goats, sometimes sheep are brought into areas adjoining the cabin or under the same roof, separated by rough partitions. The space grows tighter, the smell grows heavier, but the temperature becomes more stable. Biological heat warmth that doesn't need feeding or watching spreads slowly, evenly, and lasts. Smell is the first thing you notice. Not pleasant, not clean, but warm. The scent of animals' straw and breath blends into a thick layer of air. Within that air, wind has trouble entering, and when wind can't get in, the body relaxes more quickly. The space feels crowded. You are aware of other bodies, not only human ones. Soft scraping of hooves on the floor, the steady exhale of breath, the subtle shifting of a heavier presence nearby. These sounds don't create fear. They confirm that life is still happening around you. Biological warmth doesn't arrive like fire. It has no single hot point. It spreads. A dog at your feet eases the cold there. A cat on your chest slows your breathing. Livestock nearby prevents the air from dropping too far in temperature. Each effect is small, but together they make the night bearable. There are moments when you wake lightly because of a warm movement, a furry body shifting closer, a breath against your hand. You don't push away, you don't call out, you simply accept it. In a frontier winter, that acceptance is a deep kind of understanding. Warmth can come in many forms. Crowding isn't seen as inconvenience, it is seen as condition. Every empty space is a place where heat can escape, so filling space with bodies, human or animal, makes sense. No one calls it sacrifice. It is simply the natural order of a small shelter. Historians have debated how often animals were brought into cabins, whether it was common on the coldest nights or only when necessary. But scattered records suggest one clear truth. Humans and animals passed the night together, not out of affection, but because they shared the same basic need to stay warm. That debate fades inside the cabin. When you lie there with the warmth of another living being against you, history is no longer a question, it is an experience. You feel fur against skin, you hear breathing that isn't human, and in that difference there is a strange comfort. Animals don't understand winter the way humans do. They don't calculate or worry ahead, they simply seek warmth. And when warmth is found near people, an unspoken agreement forms: stay close and survive the night together. Some nights, that presence brings sleep faster, not deeper, but calmer. You don't need to check the temperature or wonder about the fire. Your body receives enough signals that life, movement, and warmth are still near. By morning, animals are the first to leave. They rise, stretch, search for food. Their warmth withdraws quickly, but your body has already rested. The night has passed, and that is what matters. In a frontier cabin, animals are not the only source of warmth. They are part of a quiet system alongside fire, clothing, quilts, and human bodies. None is enough alone. Together, they form a silent net of safety. As you close your eyes with the feeling of warm fur and steady breath nearby, the night grows smaller, and as the night shrinks, the mind softens. Worry fades, replaced by simple sensations: warmth, weight, stillness. And when the smells and sounds of animals blend into the fabric of the night, when biological heat has done its work, your attention drifts towards subtle signs: smoke in the air, distant wind, steady breathing, whispering softly that the night is still safe. and that you can listen to them like the gentlest lullaby. Once there is enough warmth, once bodies, human and animal alike, have found their places inside the small cabin, the night needs nothing more. No more fire, no more blankets, no more movement. At this point, the night only needs to be listened to. What remains is no longer image, but scent. The scent of smoke comes first. Not heavy, not sharp, just a thin trace hanging in the air. It no longer comes from a burning flame, but from ash, from wood that once burned. The scent is steady, unchanged. And when a scent does not change, the body understands that everything is calm. Next comes the smell of wool. Old wool soaked with dried sweat smoke time. Not pleasant by modern standards, but familiar. Familiar smells don't require vigilance. They are the smell of a place lived in for a long time. No need to recheck. Then comes the smell of straw, dry light, almost imperceptible unless you pay attention. But as your breathing slows, as your nose no longer tightens against the cold, the straw reveals itself faintly. It reminds you that there is padding between you and the ground, that you are not lying directly on the cold, that someone prepared this place before night arrived. These scents do not compete, they layer. None stands out, none disappears. Together they form a stable background like an invisible blanket laid over the space. And then there is sound. There are no loud sounds in the cabin now, no voices, no footsteps, only background sounds, steady and real. Breathing is the clearest sound, not just yours but many people, animals blending together. Breaths slow, deep, sometimes slightly out of sync, then gently aligning again. When you hear that rhythm, your body adjusts automatically, no effort required. The wind still exists outside, but it is distant, no longer striking the walls, no longer slipping through gaps. It becomes a soft background presence like waves far away, not threatening, simply there. The fire's sound is even smaller. Not burning, just embers settling, occasionally releasing a dry, brief sound. Not enough to wake you, just enough to remind you that warmth remains. These sounds don't need interpretation. They carry no new information, and because of that they lull. They repeat the same message unchanged: the night is safe. The human body is sensitive to change. But when there is no change, when everything remains steady, it allows you to let go. No need to watch, no need to turn, no need to adjust anymore. In a frontier cabin, night is not marked by clocks. It is marked by rhythm, breath, wind, fire. When those rhythms stabilize, time is no longer felt as movement. It becomes a surface upon which the body can rest. You may notice thoughts thinning, not because you force them away, but because there is nothing left to stimulate them. Familiar scents, familiar sounds, stable warmth. Everything speaks the same language. There is nothing you need to do. There are very thin, almost unnameable moments when you can no longer tell whether you are awake or asleep. When you hear breathing but don't know whose. When you smell smoke but no longer think of fire. When your body is warm but you no longer check where the warmth is coming from. That is when true sleep begins. Not deep, not complete, but enough for the body to rest. Enough to continue tomorrow. For those accustomed to frontier winter nights, these scents and sounds are not background. They are signals of safety. When they appear in the right way, at the right rhythm, there is nothing to worry about right now. And in that quiet reassurance, the body allows itself to grow heavier. Hands loosen, jaw softens, shoulders drop, breathing deepens once more. There is no climax, no clear ending. The night does not close. It simply continues slow and steady until the first light of morning changes, the smell of the air changes the sound. But before that happens, before the day arrives, there is one more rhythm in the night, the rhythm of quiet endurance, the rhythm of things done during the day, preparations unseen, silent calculations, especially firewood, the unseen foundation the entire cabin relies on to make a night this calm possible. Once the night has settled, once the scent of smoke and the rhythm of breathing have lulled the body into release, one thing still quietly occupies every corner of thought inside the cabin firewood, not clearly visible in the dark, not making a sound of its own, but present like a silent calculation made long before this night ever began. Firewood is not just fuel. In the frontier world, firewood is the unit of life itself. Having wood means having nights. Having nights means having tomorrow. Everything else can be lacking, but not wood. Lacking firewood isn't inconvenience, it is a suspended sentence. By day, while there is still enough light to see the grain in the wood people chop, not because they enjoy it, but because they must. The axe is heavy. Arms grow tired. Breath turns to vapor, even with the sun still overhead. Every swing is aimed not just at a tree, but at a cold night yet to come. No one chops for today. They chop for nights not yet here. The logs split unevenly, some large, some small. Frontier people don't waste time making them uniform. They sort by purpose, big logs for long nights, smaller ones for starting fires, scraps for waking embers. Each has its place, like coins of different value. Firewood is stacked carefully against cabin walls or under rough cover, not for looks, but to stay dry. Damp wood burns poorly, makes smoke, weakens the fire, makes the night more dangerous. So stacking wood is never careless. It is a practical ritual, repeated, steady, without words. As winter approaches, people begin to count with their eyes, not by number, but by feeling this pile for nights of hard wind, that one for ordinary cold. There is no exact formula, only experience, and experience always carries a quiet, enduring pressure. That pressure isn't loud, it doesn't race the heart. It sits there like an unanswered question. Will this be enough? Until winter lets go, no one can be sure. But they must believe they have done enough. Inside the cabin, firewood is rarely discussed, not because it is unimportant, but because everyone understands. When wood is added at night, glances are exchanged quietly, not in blame but in recognition. How much is enough? How much is too much? Each log placed in the hearth is a decision small, yet carrying the weight of an entire winter. Some nights, when wind rises more than expected, when fire consumes faster than usual, the worry becomes sharper. No one says it aloud, but you can feel it in how carefully the fire is banked, how thick the ash is laid, how early the curtains are drawn. Everything serves one aim, to make it last. Daytime labour chopping, splitting, stacking brings a special kind of calm at night. As you lie there listening to the wind outside, you know the warmth around you is not accidental. It is the result of many hours of work already done. That knowledge eases the mind. Firewood also teaches a blunt lesson about limits. You cannot burn faster than you can split. You cannot consume more than you can prepare. In the frontier world, waste is paid for with cold, and cold does not negotiate. There are families who survived winter only barely because of one miscalculation, cutting too little, trusting in a gentler season than reality delivered. Those stories are not told to frighten, but to sharpen care. And so firewood is respected not because it is rare, but because it decides survival. At night, when the fire burns evenly and the cabin is warm enough, firewood seems to vanish from thought. Yet this is when it works, the hardest, burning, transforming, becoming heat, ash, the familiar scent of smoke. It gives up its form to purchase a safe night. Ash gathers and is kept carefully. Ash is not an end, it is part of the cycle. It shelters embers, helps fire last longer. Nothing is fully discarded. Everything is reused in its own way. Firewood, then, is more than fuel. It is the rhythm of life's labour work by day, so there can be rest by night. Rest by night, so there is strength to work again by day. A slow, heavy, steady loop. And within that loop, people find a kind of reassurance, not from ease, but from enough preparation. As you lie there in the quiet cabin, listening to the fire breathe evenly, you may not think of each axe swing, each split log, but your body knows. It feels the steadiness of the heat, the regularity of the night, and within that steadiness a layer of tension softens. No one dreams of firewood. No one tells beautiful stories about it. Yet firewood is present in every peaceful sleep of the frontier winter, an invisible foundation holding up everything that has happened since nightfall. And when the night passes, its heaviest stretch, when the question of enough or not is set aside until morning, the cabin enters another phase one, where light is no longer meant to warm, but to reassure. Where a small candle, a faint oil lamp, becomes the final companion of the night, keeping darkness from fully closing in. Once the fire has been banked just enough to hold warmth, once the pressure of firewood retreats for a quiet night, the cabin does not sink completely into darkness. It keeps one very small trace of light, not to warm the body, but to keep company through the night. That light comes from a candle, an oil lamp, or a sliver of resin-rich pine. None of them are strong. None of them reach far. They do not drive the darkness away. They simply make it less dense. A candle is placed in a familiar spot where it won't be brushed by someone turning in their sleep. An oil lamp hangs low enough to avoid glare enough to avoid wakefulness. This light is not meant for seeing clearly, it is meant for not being afraid. In the frontier cabin, accidents come quickly, when night is too dark. A misstep, a stumble, an ember falling where it shouldn't. So this faint light is a quiet safety measure. It doesn't prevent every risk, but it slows risk down long enough for someone to stop, to notice, to avoid. It also lets the fire be watched without getting up. One glance tells you whether embers are still red or already grey. A small reflection confirms the hearth is still working. No constant checking, no tension. For children, this dim light means something else entirely. It is a promise that the night has not swallowed everything, that someone is still awake, or at least has left behind a sign that things are being tended. They don't need to understand it. They only need to see that light when they wake briefly and then fall asleep again more easily. The light does not flicker sharply. It sways gently with the air inside the cabin, with the breath of the fire. That movement is not stimulating. It is repetitive, steady enough for the eyes to adjust, enough for the mind to relax. Pinewood, when burned lightly, gives a different glow, slightly brighter than a candle, but quicker to fade. The scent of resin mixes with smoke, creating a feeling that is warm, dry, and familiar. This light is often used in moments that need quick reassurance, when a child startles, when wind strikes the cabin hard, when a strange sound rises outside. No one keeps this light bright all night. Once everyone has settled once, breathing evens out, the light is turned down. Candle wicks are trimmed, oil lamps are lowered. The goal is not illumination but companionship. In that faint glow, shadows on the walls lose their edges. They become soft shapes, indistinct. This matters more than it seems. Blurred shadows don't tell stories. They don't invite imagination. They let the mind rest. Dim light also slows time. Without brightness there is no urge to act, no reading, no preparing, just being still. And being still is the hardest thing in a long night. Some families place the light near a path, others near a child's bed. There is no rule, only habits shaped over many nights, placing light where it disturbs least and helps most. Faint light in the cabin is never considered wasteful. It uses very little fuel, yet gives the feeling of being watched over. Even as everyone sleeps, the light remains awake, not to guard, but to be present. When you open your eyes in the night, not from cold, but from a brief dream, that light is the first thing you notice. It doesn't wake you. It simply says you are still in the right place, that the cabin still stands, that the night has not changed in any dangerous way. You don't need to look at it long, just a moment. Then your eyes return naturally to the deeper, softer darkness. The light has done its work and withdraws from attention. In the frontier world, light is not a symbol of victory. It does not defeat the night. It lives alongside it, and that coexistence is what makes it trustworthy. As the night moves into its later half, as the light is lowered until it nearly disappears, it leaves behind not emptiness, but an afterimage, the knowledge that if needed, light can return, that this space knows how to care for itself. You lie there in the quiet cabin with dim light at the edge of awareness. No need to open your eyes, no need to think of candles or lamps. The body understands that everything is in its place, and when the light has completed its role, air-assuring, safeguarding, accompanying the night, can move one step further, lighter and deeper, into a kind of sleep that doesn't need to be perfect, only enough. Enough warmth, enough quiet, enough presence, so that when morning comes you realize you made it through the night, not gently, but safely. When the light has been lowered to its faintest point, when the fire no longer needs to be watched but simply trusted, the cabin enters a very particular state, the state of imperfect sleep. No one inside sleeps deeply. No one disappears completely, but no one is fully awake either. This is not the kind of sleep modern people often seek. There is no sudden drop into darkness. No clean separation between waking and sleeping. This sleep is like a thin layer of fog settling over the body, enough to soften exhaustion, enough to ease the tensions gathered through a long day. You lie there wrapped in layers of protection, clothing, quilts, bed curtains, the warmth of people and animals nearby. The body does not fully let go. A very small part remains alert, but most of it has accepted that this night will pass the way it must. No one expects unbroken sleep. That expectation does not exist in the frontier world. People do not demand comfort from the night. They hope only for enough. Enough warmth, enough quiet, enough safety to open their eyes in the morning. Sleep comes and goes in short waves. Sometimes you dream. Sometimes you simply drift. Sometimes you wake lightly for no clear reason at all. But each time you wake, you notice one essential thing: everything is still all right. The warmth is still there. Breathing around you remains steady. No strange sounds. No disturbance. On nights like this, the measure of success is very small. And precisely because it is small, it is solid. A successful night is not one that brings good sleep. A successful night is one that takes no one away. No one says that out loud, but it lives in every blurred thought, in every brief awakening. When you feel the hand of the person beside you still warm, when you hear the breathing of children, When you notice that the elderly can still turn in their sleep even slowly, the presence of others is what holds you in this kind of sleep, not through intense emotion but through familiarity. You do not need to look, you only need to know they are still there. In a world shaped by cold, simple presence is already a form of protection. The human body is very intelligent. When conditions are not right for full rest, it shifts into conservation. The heart slows just enough. Muscles release some tension. The mind stops thinking deeply, stops solving problems. It drifts, saving energy for the next day. There are dreams that are very short, very formless. No story, no sharp images. Just sensations, warmth, heaviness, slowness. Dreams like these carry no message. They are simply signs that the body has crossed the thin line between waking and sleep. The sleep is not gentle, but it is durable. It does not make you feel cared for, but it gives you the chance to continue. And in the frontier world, continuing is what matters most. Now and then you wake because of a small patch of cold, a foot, a shoulder, a neck. But before discomfort grows, you shift, pull the quilt higher, lean closer to the person beside you. No thinking required. The body performs this adjustment easily, as if trained by countless nights before. Each time you adjust, sleep returns more quickly, not deeper, but quicker. And that is enough. The night passes without clear markers. No one knows exactly when midnight arrives. No one needs to. Time is no longer divided. It becomes a single, slow, dark, barely warm mass. Within that stretch of time, people do not seek comfort. They seek continuity. And when they find it, even for one night, the body remembers it as a deep form of reassurance. Morning may be hard, the body may ache, joints may be stiff, but morning exists, and that means the night has done its job. A sleep that isn't gentle, but enough. Enough to get through the night, enough to lose no one, enough for morning light to find someone there to receive it. As you lie there on the thin boundary between waking and sleeping, something very light appears. Not a thought, but a letting go. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of the need for good sleep. Letting go of the urge to control. And in that release, the night becomes kinder. Not because it grows warmer, but because you have accepted its rhythm. Nothing more is needed. Nothing more must be fixed. Everything was arranged during the day and the days before it. The night only needs to pass. And as the night moves beyond its hardest stretch as sleep, imperfect though it is, keeps you here. This story also approaches its final quiet point. Not to end, but to gently withdraw, making space for a small, distant thought about time, about people, and about how across generations we have learned one simple thing: we do not need to defeat the night, only to live through it. When the extinct night has finished its work, when sleep, imperfect though it was, has kept you here until now, the story no longer needs another event. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to conclude. What remains is one very small truth, very quiet, present from the beginning of the night until this moment. There is no victory in a frontier winter night, no glory to be remembered, only existence silent, enduring, extended by one more night. The people you have been with did not defeat the cold. They did not conquer winter. They did not overcome the night in any grand sense. They simply moved alongside it slowly, carefully, with what they had: a closed cabin, a fire kept just enough, a few worn quilts, each other's body heat, and a great deal of patience. The night passed without leaving a clear mark. No one woke and said the night was wonderful. No one remembered every moment. But the night did the one thing it needed to do. It left everyone here when morning arrived. And perhaps that is the core of many nights throughout human history. Your ancestors, whether on the frontier in rough wooden cabins or anywhere else, did not hope for dazzling lives. They hoped for what could be endured. They hoped tomorrow would come. They hoped no one would disappear into the dark. Those hopes were so simple, they didn't need words. When you think of them, you don't need heroic images. Just imagine a quiet night where everything was just enough to continue, where people learned to adjust themselves rather than force the world to change. And then, very gently, this story touches the present, not to compare, not to instruct, but simply to place things side by side. Today, you may sleep in a room sealed from wind, with steady temperature and a soft bed. Yet modern exhaustion is not new. It only wears a different shape. It comes from faster rhythms, heavier expectations, pressure to sleep perfectly, rest deeply, recover quickly. Perhaps what your ancestors whisper through this winter night is not how to stay warm, but how to lower expectations. Not every night must be perfect. Not every sleep must be deep. Sometimes enough is already plenty. Enough for the body not to collapse. Enough for the mind not to panic. Enough for you to remain with yourself until morning. This philosophy does not need to be understood or remembered. It only needs to be felt, like a breath slowing, like shoulders dropping, like eyes growing heavy when they no longer have to hold themselves open. In frontier nights, people did not try to defeat time. They let time move through them slowly, evenly, without resistance. And in that lack of resistance, a deep kind of peace appeared, the peace of accepting the natural rhythm of life. You may carry this with you or not. Either way is fine. This story does not ask you to change. It simply exists like the last small fire at night, not to illuminate, only to be present. As you lie there listening to your own breathing, you may realize you need nothing more right now. No more thinking, no more understanding, no further distance to travel. The night has done its work. So has the story. There is no firm ending, no clear stopping point, only a lingering quiet where everything is allowed to dissolve, like cooling ash, like dimming light, like breath becoming, so even you no longer notice it. And in that quiet, if sleep comes, let it come. If it does not, that is also fine. Because sometimes the greatest comfort is not sleeping deeply, but knowing that you do not need to do anything more to deserve rest. The night is still moving. You are still here. And that is enough. The most important message that lingers after this very slow journey does not lie in the brutal cold, nor in specific survival techniques. What stays the longest is a simple truth. People do not live better by fighting their circumstances, but by learning how to live sufficiently within them. Those people of the past were not searching for comfort. They did not expect perfect sleep or gentle nights. What they needed was simply to make it through the night without losing anyone. They accepted broken sleep, creeping cold, tight spaces, and exhaustion not out of resignation, but because they understood the limits of the human body and of nature itself. That understanding is what created endurance. Looking at life today, we can recognize a quiet parallel. Modern people are tired too, just in a different way. We try to sleep deeper, control more, optimize everything. But sometimes what we truly need is not perfect rest, but permission to rest in a way that is enough. Enough to avoid collapse. Enough to continue tomorrow. This story reminds us that quiet preparation, a slower rhythm, and the presence of familiar people nearby are the most enduring sources of warmth, not comfort, not achievement, but connection and the ability to adapt to the natural rhythm of life. Thank you for taking the time to listen and for staying until these final moments. If you feel a little calmer, please like the video, share it with anyone who could use a gentle pause, and subscribe to continue traveling with these slow, sleep-ready history stories. Wishing you a night that is warm enough, quiet enough, and truly peaceful sleep.